Today we will improve openings by learning 5 rules about central pawns in chess that every player must know. Hey, I am ChessBrain and I'm here to help you take your game to the next level. In today's video, we will look closer at 3 different pawn structures and I will show you how to avoid really big mistakes. Get ready, let's start with the first pawn structure where we have central pawns and our opponent doesn't have any. In this position, we control the center and this gives us 2 benefits. First of all, you will probably complete your development without any problems. So we will develop the knight, maybe the bishop somewhere, castle, and also develop other pieces because you have space on the board, so that shouldn't be difficult for you. And the second benefit is that because you have the space advantage, probably you will get better squares to develop your pieces than your opponent, who might be a little bit cramped because of the space disadvantage. And that's why it's so good to control the center. Of course, at some point your opponent will play pawn to c5, pawn to d5, and he will attack the center as well. But we need to remember that our opponent has to do something, right? We don't, so we enjoy our position at the moment, and I strongly encourage you to take the center if you have opportunity and your opponent plays a little bit passively. Another position, so here we have 3 central pawns, our opponent doesn't have any pawns, and we can see that he plays passively, right? So a6, h6, he lost the tempos already, and here I think many players make a mistake because they try to punish somehow the opponent because he played incorrectly in the opening. So they try to attack too fast. And this is quite often a mistake. And actually here we have the first rule, which says maintain control of the center, attack only if it guarantees that you accomplish something significant. So what can happen here if you decide to attack our opponent too early? You might play, for example, d5. Then the opponent plays knight e5, attacking your both pieces. You take it, pawn takes back, and actually I don't see any accomplishment at the moment, right? We doubled his pawns, but he can undouble them whenever he wants to. And in addition, now the dark square bishop is more active. Before there was a pawn on d6, so maybe we only helped our opponent. And most of the time, the best strategy in situations like that will be completing development because your opponent plays passively, you control the center, and he has a lot of problems that he needs to solve. Yes, and the main of his problem, of course, is completing development because he doesn't have space, everything is cramped, so I have no idea how he wants to develop the queen, for example, and of course, there are the rooks as well, yes, that he needs to develop. But we don't need to do anything. We can just continue our development, and your opponent will spend more time trying to find some options to free up his position, which will be not easy. And if you look at another position, so this is the pure defense for black, and here white has the center. Yes, so again, it will be easy for white to complete development and bring the pieces to the good squares. Black at some point will start fighting for the center with c5 or e5, attacking our position. But again, I am a big fan of having the center, so if you can take it, of course, I encourage you to do that. We jump to the second pawn structure, and here we have 2 central pawns, and our opponent has only 1 central pawn. Let's take a look at this position. This is French defense. Most of the time in situations like that, where we have 2 central pawns and our opponent has only 1, and we will have 3 options. We can decide to take it, the pawn, to trade them, maybe push this pawn forward, or maybe defend this pawn on e4. Before I will share with you some thoughts about it and how we can think about these positions, I want to tell you that most of the time it doesn't matter what you choose. Because all the moves will have like very similar value or the same value according to engine, and all these moves will be correct. But I want to share with you some ideas to help you understand this a little bit better and choose what you prefer. And first we will look closer at taking the pawn, the central pawn. And the rule here is don't trade pawns if it solves your opponent's problems. At the moment, what I can see is that this pawn on e6 blocks light square bishop for opponent. And also I think that this pawn can block the rook in the future. If my opponent castles and wants to bring the rook to the center, it will be also blocked by this pawn. So I think if we decide to take it, he takes back, he will not have these problems anymore. The bishop can be easily developed. Also, if he castles, the rook goes to the open file. And that's why I don't think taking on d5 might be the best choice. In addition, the pawn structure is completely symmetrical, so it might be difficult to get some advantage in the early stage of the game. If you look at another opening, maybe c6, d5, here we also have two central pawns and our opponent has only one pawn. We consider taking on d5, right? And the question is, do we solve any problems for our opponent? And at the moment, I can see that this knight cannot jump to the center, right? Cannot be developed because there is a pawn on c6. So if the knight wants to participate in the game, it might go to d7, but then it blocks the light square bishop. So he needs to first move this bishop out. And there are not many good squares. Actually, I don't see any good squares at the moment for the light square bishop. So this creates some problems for our opponent. So maybe it will be not the best to take it, and maybe we might choose e5 or knight c3. So this is how you can think about taking this central pawn. And if you look, for example, at d4, d4, d5, same situation. We have these two pawns in the middle and the opponent has only one. If you want to take it on d5, think, okay, does it solve any of my opponent's problems? And here I can see that there is the bishop on e6, right, which is still blocked. And if we decide to take it, he takes back, and then there are no problems with the bishop anymore. And also the e-file will be open for his rook in the future. Okay, let's move on to the next rule. Be cautious with pushing your pawns too far in the opening. What does it mean? It means that every time you decide to push your pawns forward to the opponent's side of the board in the opening, be careful because there might be quick action. Yes, the opponent will start to attack these pawns, and remember that the most important is completing development. If you push these pawns too far, he will start to attack them probably quickly, and you need to think about it. So let's say we play e5, the opponent plays c5, yes, attacking this pawn on d4, and now there are two options. Maybe you will play c3, maybe knight f3. Let's assume you continue your development with the knight, takes, and now what happens is this pawn is quite alone on our opponent's territory. So he will start to attack this pawn quickly, you might defend it, and then maybe he plays queen c7, attacking this further, and now like you can see, you need to concentrate on this pawn that we pushed far in the opening, instead of thinking, okay, how can I complete my development, right? Where do I want to castle, for example? These questions don't exist because now we are focused on this little pawn in the middle. And another option, you might play pawn to c3, for example, then he takes, pawn takes, and this is the backward pawn, which means that it might be object of the attack for your opponent. It cannot be defended by pawns anymore, so he might play knight c6, knight f3, and for example, your opponent will bring the knight, queen, and there is some attack on this d4 pawn, and you need to find a good way to play against it. And it's your choice. Yes, this is correct. We can play like this type of positions. Of course, that's one of the options, but you need to decide. You might try to play a few games like that, and then you can decide if you like these types of structures, or maybe you prefer something different. And for each player, this will be different. Some of them will like this type of positions, and some of them will not like. So the choice is yours. Let's take a look at, for example, Caro-Kann, c6, d4, d5. And if we decide to push our pawn on our opponent's territory, there will be the same, right? So the quick attack on your pawns, you might defend it, he will trade them, develop the bishop, you might play like that, and then he will start to play queen b6. Again, he will bring the knight to f5 with some attack on your central pawn. So we need to be aware of that. And the last option, for example, we have this type of position, and you decide to play c5. Again, you push your pawn to the opponent's side in the opening. It means that there might be quick action, and the opponent can start attack your pawns. And in this case, he plays pawn to b6. The pawn is under attack twice, and we defend only once, so we have to do something. And if we take it, I already prefer position for black, because black can further put some pressure in the middle, and also the rook is already opened on the a file, so I really like it. Black has less pawn islands at the moment, and if you decide to defend this pawn on c5, he might play a5, and I think white loses the pawn in this situation, unless they play take on a5, but this is, I think, much better for black. I don't want to spend too much time here, or maybe wait a second, takes, maybe queen f6, and this rook might be trapped. Maybe this will be a better solution to win some material here. That's why the rule says, like, be cautious with pushing your pawns too far in the opening. Yes, because then there might be quick action, and there might be small chaos on the board, instead of just, developing the pieces, right, moving to the middle game and trying to fight in this stage of the game. So the last option is we might, for example, defend this pawn, and we can play knight c3. And if your opponent decides to take it, we centralize our knight. We also control a little bit more the center. So I think this position, solution might be quite interesting. Also, if you look at the Caro-Kann, you might also try to do something similar. So knight to c3, right? And if opponent decides to take it, you will centralize the knight. You control a little bit more center. I think this is also quite interesting. And also with d4, d5. In this type of position, we might play maybe pawn to e3. I know we block the bishop, defending this pawn if you're worried about it. Or you might play knight c3, putting more pressure in the middle. If he takes, then you will take the whole center, and probably you will recapture this pawn soon. Or maybe knight f3, yes, and focus on castling a little bit more. And if the opponent takes this pawn, you will quickly recapture this with the bishop. You control the whole center, so this also might be a good idea. Let's move on to another structure. This time we have two central pawns, and our opponent has two central pawns as well. And the rule says aim to capture towards the center. When white starts the game with pawn to d4, sometimes I see this structure where we have these two central pawns, right, attacking the middle, and then black plays pawn to c5. And now we have two pawns against two pawns, and quite often people don't know what to do with that. Should we capture this pawn on c5, maybe this on d5, maybe just leave it, right? So they play knight c3, e3, like many moves, just keeping this pawn in the center because no one knows what to do. And so here the rule says aim to capture toward the center. So in this situation, I can encourage you to try taking the pawn towards the center. And the goal is that if the opponent takes with this pawn, we will take another one on c5. And now the opponent ends up with the isolated pawn. This pawn doesn't have any friends around him to defend it. Yes, it's quite alone, can be defended only by the pieces at the moment. So it means that this will be our target. Yes, we can play knight c3 maybe, and somehow we will start to attack this pawn. Some players like to play with the isolated pawns because they also have some space to bring these pieces to the game. But you don't have any weaknesses in the position. It means that I think for your opponents, it might be to difficult to play these types of position anyway. You have the clear target, the opponent doesn't have it, so I think it would be better for you. And there is another option that if we capture towards the center, the opponent might take it with the 9, for example, and then maybe you will push pawn to e4, taking control of the center, or maybe knight c3, or maybe you will take this pawn on c5. There are many options. Okay, now we play against central pawns. So let me show you that. Opponent plays e4, we fight for the center as well, right? We play e5, knight f3, knight c6. This is quite standard. And then white plays pawn to d4. We take it, knight takes, and what happens here is white controls the center. He has the central pawn and we don't have it. And the rule says here, focus on achieving a playable position and exploiting your opponent in the middle game. So sometimes we cannot do anything about it. The opponent has the central pawn, and what I want to tell you is that you don't always have to get advantage after the opening. Like many times, I would mainly focus on getting playable position after opening and then trying to exploit our opponent in the middle game, and there is nothing wrong with that. White starts the game, so sometimes he will have a little bit more control of the center than you, and this is completely normal thing. Let's move on to big mistakes that you really want to avoid. So the first thing is that when you play d5 as black, trying to control the center and the opponent puts pressure, don't play knight to f6 defending this pawn. Because what happens then is he takes this pawn, we take it back, and after e4, look, the opponent controls the whole center and you don't have anything here. It means that it might be very difficult for you to complete development and the whole game might be a disaster. This is not the best start of the game for black. So if your opponent puts pressure on this pawn, I think it's much better to play e6, supporting this pawn, and then if he takes this, you control the center as well. Or some players choose pawn to c6. The same idea, after taking this, we still control the center. The second mistake that I can see is that people take this pawn at c4. Be careful with that, because if your opponent plays e4 and controls the center, I think you will recapture this pawn easily soon on c4. It's very difficult to defend it. Then again you will end up without controlling the center. It means you will be more cramped in your position, and it will be more difficult to advance to the middle game. And another mistake, e4, some players play c5, for example, and white tries to take the center, and black easily allow the opponent to do that. I'm also not sure if this is the best option for black, because now, again, we play against these two central pawns, and this is not easy to proceed. So in a situation like that, after he plays this c3, you might really like to fianchetto your bishop most of the time, but right in this situation, this is not a good option anymore. So maybe we will play pawn to d5, and if opponent takes this, we bring our queen into the game, and it's okay for us because the opponent cannot attack us with the minor pieces, and we also don't struggle with this central disadvantage. And these are common mistakes that I really encourage you to avoid. Let's sum up what we've learned today. So first, maintain control of the center. If your opponent plays passively, you don't need to attack him right away. He has huge problems that it will be very difficult for him to solve. And in the meantime, just complete your development and take good squares for your pieces. This is the best, most of the time, this is the best way to exploit our opponent's mistakes. If you think about taking the pawn, first ask the question, does it solve any of my opponent's problems? Does he have any problems in the position? This will help you make much better decisions. Be cautious with pushing your pawns to the opponent's side of the board. If you do that, there will be probably a quick action, so you might try to play a few games and just check if this is something what you enjoy and you feel confident in these types of position, and if this is right for you. If not, then you can choose alternative variations. If you have a situation where you have these two central pawns against opponent's two central pawns, like I showed in the example, focus on capturing towards the center. This is in general rule for pawns in chess, right? We want to capture towards the center, so it might be easy to remember. Sometimes we are not able to control the center. Our opponent is faster, and focus on getting playable position and try to win the game in the middle game. Thank you for watching this video. If this lesson helped you a little bit more understand what happens with these central pawns, please remember to subscribe to my channel. This motivates me a lot to create more content and more lessons to help you improve your game. And if you haven't seen yet my previous episode about when to learn the opening theory, I strongly encourage you to check it out. There is a huge mistake that many players are making at the moment, and thanks to watching this video, you can avoid it. Again, thank you a lot for watching this video. Have a great day and see you next time.